we look at LinkedIn and we look at like, the folks that are, the thought leaders and this and that, but we're not seeing is all of the work they took to actually get there. They just put themselves out there. They just kept recording. They just kept trying. They just kept doing. And so, okay, maybe you're not going to hit it out of the park your first 10 times, but the 11th time could be that time. So if you know in your gut that what it is that you're doing is worth it and what's best for the organization, for your learners, keep trying, and that's a huge lesson in and of itself.
Hello and welcome to the Making Better podcast, where we talk about how to make ourselves, our teams, and our organizations better. Whether you are a business leader, a talent development professional, or an individual contributor, this show will give you actionable insights to help improve your own performance and the performance of those around you. Our guest today is Vanessa Alzate. Vanessa is the founder and CEO of Anchored Training, a digital media development company that helps create e-learning, online videos, instructor-led training, and more. I've been following her on LinkedIn for quite a while and noticed that she recently started talking a lot about how to apply the lessons of TikTok videos to training. This is something that I'm really passionate about, and so I wanted to have her on to discuss. In today's episode, you can expect to learn what makes short form content so successful, how to convince subject matter experts to cut down the length of training, and what are some of the core concepts that you need to focus on in order to make your training as engaging as a TikTok video. Before we get into the discussion, I do want to remind you to hit like and subscribe if this is your first time to the show. And if you were already subscribed, then if I could please ask, please, to share this show with just one other person, because that, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. And so with that, let's get into the discussion with Vanessa Alzate. So I want to start with a simple question, Vanessa. Do you have a favorite TikTok creator?
Yes, Miss Excel. 1000%.
That's hilarious. And, listeners might not understand why I'm starting with that. But, when I watch your feed and some of the talks you've given recently, you've been talking a lot about what people can learn from TikTok, what instructional designers can learn from TikTok. There's no reason for you to know this, but about 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, I gave a talk on how to give your training the TikTok treatment. And Miss Excel was like my example. So we are definitely in line with this. Why do you think it's so important for people in training to be looking at what's happening in TikTok or social media in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has helped to democratize learning, and it really has helped folks to realize things don't have to be perfect in order for you to learn something. So I came from software training. That was my very first role out of college and is still a love. Give me a new software system and I'm going to find the bugs. That's my favorite thing to do. And so in watching Miss Excel, you don't see the clicks really, right? You don't see, you just see what happens. Like, you will see a highlight where things are supposed to happen, the formula pop up on the screen. And it is everything that I have been taught not to do, or that people don't want to see, right? People want to see the mouse moving across the screen to hit the button. They actually don't care about that. TikTok has proven to us they don't need to know that. What they want to know is what are the steps. And that's why I love it. And anybody that can make Excel seem fun to me is that's my people. That's who I need to talk to. I need to know more about what's your magic with something, as what we think of as so mundane. Everybody knows how to use it as like Excel, but it's really not, as widely used.
I've been experiencing this hardcore recently with PowerPoint on YouTube and YouTube Shorts, because the nice thing about it, like you said, it doesn't take the time. You see what happens, but it's not very clearly following everything. But what you see is the result.
Yeah.
At least that's what I see really clearly when I'm like, wow, that slide, you made that in PowerPoint? What? Like, that's crazy. That looks so good. And it inspires me to want to learn more. And maybe I don't get everything I need in that 60-second video, but it inspires me to dig deeper and to follow that account and watch it again and see that same thing in an expanded version. So it's like, it gets me in the funnel almost from a sales point of view. So what do you think, you mentioned that it really showed you, some of these accounts are doing everything that you were taught not to do.
Yeah.
Could we go through that a little bit more of like,
Yeah.
how do people start to make this transition of thinking like a creator when making training?
Yeah. So for me, I think when you think of a creator, your end goal often is the viewer. And you want to make this so relatable that they continue to follow. It feels like you're walking alongside of them. Whereas from a instructional design perspective, we don't do that as well. I think our
Hmm.
intentions are to do that, but we'll start things with welcome to Excel 101. Here are the learning objectives. You never start
Falling
with
asleep
that.
already.
Right, exactly. I don't want to take that. And to your
Yes.
point, to get them into the funnel, like that's what we need to be thinking about, right?
Yeah.
People buy these, huge libraries. They invest in LinkedIn Learning. Why aren't people using them? And I'm like, what's your funnel to get them into it? Right.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
where these
Yes.
TikTok things can happen. And, you know, when we talk about, I talk about repurposing content, TikTok
Yes.
style, right? I'll take my longer training, I'll chop it up, and then that's what I'm going to entice people to come in with. And that's what
Yes.
people are going to recall and remember. So I think there's those parts of it. And for me too, it's the reminder when I watch a TikTok video, there's all of them have three things: a hook, something that got me to want to watch it. It's got its content and it's got its call to action. That's the magic formula. And that's the formula that we need to be following, right? So, like, I just went
Mm.
through this training and we usually end with a thank you and congratulations, not a call to action like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? Right? What's my next step? And so if we can
Mm.
start to build those things in, people can start to feel a little bit more empowered to take action on what they just learned.
Yeah. So breaking that down a little bit. So I love those kind of three things that you mentioned. And so the first thing is thinking about the end user and like, why would they want to take this at all?
Mhm.
That's like kind of a first lesson that we can really learn from creators in getting that hook, getting them in,
Mhm.
so that because we're competing with all of these creators, so we
Mhm.
need to like learn those lessons and see what's making them successful. So having a clear hook of what you're going to get them, bring them in for. The second thing I heard is repurposing. And I love that. I think, yeah, I mean, especially in any organization which has Slack, this is kind of, it really mirrors that idea of learning, getting more connected with marketing and thinking
Yeah.
about things from a marketing perspective of, yeah, I love doing that exact same thing. How do you take the longer training, create a 30-second highlight reel or something, some kind of thing, and drop that in a Slack channel so that
Mhm.
it kind of gets people interested. So there's, how are you going to hook them is number one. There's, how do you repurpose to like get the word out there of
Mhm.
this training. And then it sounded like, what was the third thing you mentioned was having that clear call to action
Mhm.
of making sure there is a direct link. How have you, do you have any examples of how you've seen this done successfully, of how you've transitioned from one thing to another thing?
Yeah. You mean utilizing like TikTok videos? So,
And maybe not even TikTok videos, but just like these premises of
yeah.
what makes good TikTok videos and applying them to training.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do. We've had customers that we just look to reframe how it is that they're learning, and how it is that they're delivering content. And so we work with a lot of membership organizations that provide educational content, certification programs, things like that. The thing about them is, especially with our most recent case, they may be the most well known in the industry. However, they cannot rest on their laurels, if you will, of like, well, we're the most well known. We
Yeah.
constantly have to evolve how it is that they're engaging their learners because and how they're delivering their content. So it was so lecture based. It was hours and hours of like
Mm.
live stream lectures, and it's all medical information. So like wow, that's a lot of content to just be
Yeah.
delivering talking head style. And so what we started doing is, chatting with them and recommending, here are some ways that you can break up the content, right? Instead of giving folks everything, let's give it to them into those bite-sized chunks. So similar to like TikTok style videos, like just like maybe not 30 seconds, but like we're talking about 5-minute videos, 20, 15
Yeah.
minutes over, as opposed to like their 3-hour training they take now. And then breaking down the language. So when you watch a TikTok video, you are not usually, you feel like they're talking with you, like you're their friend, right? Or if their
Yes.
colleague or their peer. You don't feel talked down to. And so that
Yes.
is what we're talking about with our customers too, is how do we reframe our language? So again, it feels like we're walking alongside with them. As opposed to talking to them or at them. So just taking
Yeah.
those short steps really does help get people to feel like I can do this. This is training I'm actually going to stop and pay attention to because it is different. Because and I feel empowered to do something. The other thing I will say is if you told me probably before 2020, if a customer said we needed to create videos, immediately I'd be like, okay, I'm going to have to find actors. I need the right lighting. I need the right camera and this and that in order for it to be this perfect situation to record. TikTok videos, some of the best ones are not perfect. It might just be someone with a very, a plain background or in their car gives the best lighting. So they really, videos can happen anywhere. What truly matters, people care about, is the content. So if you start to pull and you think about those nuggets, it helps you to reframe and relook at when it is that you're writing. Like what is the phrasing? What is the wording that I'm using? How am I talking to folks? What is that voice? And then am I breaking it down enough for someone to be able to understand in these little these snippet moments?
Yeah, that I think that's great advice. Yeah, and I mean, geez, the amount of power that is in just a cell phone these
Mm-hmm.
days. Your standard smartphone in terms of production ability is out of control. And if
Yeah.
and then if you spend $300 on a little rig that has a shotgun mic and a light thing, then you've got a movie studio.
Yeah.
I'd love to break down. I imagine you've gotten some pushback on some of these things
Always.
from folks. And I'd love to kind of look at a few of the points that you made individually and how you approached that kind of change. One on just breaking the content down into smaller chunks and kind of trying to approach this idea that it doesn't need to be a 3-hour lecture. What pushback did you get about that idea, and how did you change minds?
Hmm. Well, how are they going to know everything if I don't give them all of the information? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
it's called scaffolding learning. We're going to build the box and we're going to give them little pieces because then in the same breath, they'll say to me, the people that are taking the training don't have time. They're very busy. If they want to take an asynchronous or watch a video, they're doing it in between seeing patients. I'm like, well, what doctor do you know has 3 hours in between patients? My best friend's my doctor. I get a little bit more time, but she's like from one room to another. So we've got to really talk about meeting our learners truly where they're at and helping the learning to fit in. And we can build that, if you think about their own education, you didn't get all of the information up front. It was built, right? You took your foundation, then you took the next level and it goes on from there. So taking on that approach. And I think for me, it's always been about understanding who is providing maybe that objection, understanding more about who they are, what's important to them, where their mindset might be at, and now we're framing it, right? And we're framing it in a way that they can understand. So when I was, talking to these stakeholders, well, they're doctors. Okay, well, I can lean back into how they probably got their education and was able to relate it there. So they were able to physically relate what it was like for them. And now they're able to put themselves in the mindset of their learners.
Yeah, it sounds so that feels like a key component right there is getting them out of the shoes that their own shoes, the shoes that they were in and how they received everything,
Mhm.
and trying to put them in the shoes of these news people. Because I'm guessing if you just I feel like one of the simplest questions, whether us as instructional designers or the subject matter experts, is just simply like, well, would you want to watch this?
Mhm.
Like that's got to be a pretty easy question to get people to maybe think like, maybe I wouldn't. Do you have people say like, well, they have to anyway? Is there kind of those hardliners
Oh
that
yeah,
that
I
push
mean
back?
there's definitely folks that just are like, well, this is how it's always been done, hasn't failed us yet. And it depends on who they are, whether or not we can skirt around that. And then
Hmm.
sometimes, and I'll get people that will ask, okay, well, we want to do this. What happens if someone says this to me? And I just say, okay, well then you don't have to go and eat the elephant, right? You can start small. So start with something small in your team,
Yes.
build up the case, build up the data, build up the results on your own, like
Yeah.
in a smaller scale, and then you go back and you present it. And what
Yeah.
they really are is truly, we don't, no one, none of us love change. I mean, I do actually. I thrive in chaos and change. So, like, I don't put myself in this category. However, most people don't like change. They don't like doing something new or being outside of their comfort zone. And that's really what you're dealing with. So if you can show
Yeah.
people that it actually works, like, and that they don't have to be the early adopter because someone else is, and now they're
Yeah.
following a plan or a template of how to do it, they're way more comfortable.
Yeah, that I think that sounds right. There's always more problems to solve. There's always more stakeholders, and so there is a level of just like, well, let's not try to win this battle right now. Let's go somewhere else for whether it's a different project, a smaller project that we can try to have some wins on.
Mm-hmm.
When do you? And maybe there's not a clear answer to this. When do you decide it's to stop pushing back, right? When you say, hey, we want to do this new thing, and then you want to have a conversation and see, when do you decide, okay, this person's kind of setting their mind, so we're just going to kind of go with what they want this time and see if we can have some wins somewhere else and then bring that data back for the next project.
I think it varies from person to person, from
Yeah.
organization
Yeah.
to organization. That's like, you knew I was going to say that. That's a stereotypical answer.
It depends.
It depends. How much is it going to cost to create this e-learning? Well, it depends. I would say I don't honestly push as much as people think that I do
I love
because
it.
I think you pushing too much will end up any sort of like social capital or political capital you have with that person. If you push too much,
Yeah.
you will lose it. So I
Yeah.
give it a couple of shots, maybe three, uh, you know, baseball rules, and then I'm out. I'm not going to push them, and I don't
Yeah.
want to make someone ever uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I go about it that way. But what I will say, Matt, that's been very interesting for me lately is this huge disparity between who's asking for TikTok related training or like, how do I do this? Or like, we want to do more of this versus our, individual contributors. People that are
Hmm.
coming to me saying, I want to do this, they're all senior level stakeholders. There's obviously like some individual contributors and frontline folks,
Uh-huh.
but a lot of VPs, CEOs, CLOs are coming to me. And they're saying we need to do things differently, and I'm telling my team we need to do things differently, but I'm getting the same stuff back. And so
Interesting.
it's been, yeah, it's I've noticed it more probably the last 2 months, that
Hmm.
we're kind of adjusting some of our sales strategy at Anchored, and just some different conversations I've been a part of very recently. But that's been a very interesting disparity. So I'm like, where is the disconnect actually happening, and how can I help to fill that gap for them?
Yeah. Have you gotten anywhere with kind of understanding that disconnect?
Hmm.
Is it a time? I mean, I'm sure again, I'm sure this depends. But are you primarily seeing like, is it a time thing where people don't feel like they have the time to do something different? Is it a skill thing? Is it a trust thing where
Hmm.
maybe they don't feel like they can really go and do that thing?
I would say it's all three.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
definitely a skill thing and just not being able to really think outside the box. It's not necessarily also an understanding. So I got a big objection I get is, well, we can't use TikTok. We're government or like security.
Got it.
So that is a
Yeah.
trying to understand kind of that you don't need to use that. It's pulling the inspiration. Is definitely another
Yes.
one. So it's definitely all three.
That makes
And it
that
just
makes sense.
depends.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So then going back again to this idea of different things, different reframes and the pushback that you're getting. What
Mhm.
about this idea of it doesn't need to be perfect and trying to convince people to, I mean, the back of so this is my new Better Every Day shirts. And on the back, it says, just launch it, because
Yeah.
that's my whole thing that I'm always trying to convince people. It's like, stop, iterate, stop trying again, stop editing, just put it out there. What kind of pushback do you get when you say, actually, you don't need actors. You can do it yourself. You don't need a whole production crew. What kind of pushback do you get on that?
Yeah. There is some pushback on the level of, but it's going to be different than what we're totally used to, or, like our current
Hmm.
training programs and things like that. And I remind folks, yes, it's going to be different, but how long did that take to launch? And how much time and money was spent going into that one video?
Yeah.
Now imagine cutting that launch time in half, and now you're able to get out there and start to get feedback. And because it wasn't the end all be all perfect, right? Now you can just make those little tweaks, and those little tweaks is what really makes the impact on the organization to really make this, like, that's what makes it perfect. And so if you
Yeah.
can reframe in that way, I feel like that has been super successful for them to understand, like, okay, we can try it a little bit differently. And then sometimes I like sneakily will send stuff to people. I'm not above sending an Instagram reel and
Hmm.
just being like, did you learn something? Was it perfect lighting? Was it a little blurry or
Hmm.
shaky? Yes, but you still learned something. So it
Hmm.
can be done for you too.
Yep. 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 Awesome. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's just kind of, it doesn't take long for people to, again, comes back to that kind of reflection piece of, what are the things that you
Mhm.
enjoy watching, and how much do you care what camera it was shot on, or did you notice the lighting angles? I think that reflection
Right.
is definitely a really big thing. That makes a lot of sense. So I would love, actually, I wasn't expecting to do this, but I'd love to kind of step back for a minute. You've been running anchored training for a while now, right? How long have you
Mhm.
been doing your thing?
As my youngest is Gianna's 6 years.
So I wasn't planning on going into this, but you had mentioned, you've been running anchored for a while now, and you get to
Mhm.
interface with all these different organizations just from kind of a bigger picture perspective. What are some of the major changes, like, these short form videos has been one of them. What are some of the major changes you've seen in kind of the ID and talent development space over that time?
Yeah. So I would say the changes that I'm starting to see is people are truly investing in their people. And they're
Hmm.
seeing that, I think, or they're wanting to be clear. And
Yeah.
they want to
Okay.
truly provide the resources to help them be better. They just don't know how to do it, and how to do it in a phased
That was great.
or economical way that, like, would fit maybe their budget and things like that, because they know there's a lot of work to be done and it feels very overwhelming. um, and then I think also what we're seeing is a lot of folks wanting just more understanding that we have a lot on our plates. And so what used to work, taking someone out for an entire day to go to training, we can't afford to do that anymore. So how do we
Mm,
fit learning in their workday, right? And
yeah.
how does it become not so much of a separate event, but more integrated into what it is that they're doing day to day? And I think, look, we're about to have a whole, well, we already have a generation, but really thinking about the next generation. I'm already looking at Gen Alpha. Everyone's over here talking about Gen Z. I'm looking at Gen Alpha already.
Yeah.
That generation, all they know is like the YouTube and video and all of that.
Yes.
That's going to start to become even more of an expectation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
having these knowledge bases and the ability for them to pull the information that they need when they want it. And it's not a generational
Yeah.
thing. That's really what we all just truly want, right? I just want,
Yeah.
just give me the information when I need it. And then let me be on my merry way and try to get my 200 emails down to inbox zero, which feels like an impossible task.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right, and it is very very much a different framing in um, people are becoming, it's all the best practices that we've always learned of, adult learning theory, but it just is really learning theory of
Hmm.
people like to have control of their learning. And
Yeah.
people are growing up now in a world where, I use YouTube. YouTube has become the de facto place that I go to search for things when I want
Hmm.
information now, whether it's I need to know how to do something on my car or around the house or some new software or figure out what to buy. I just go to YouTube and find a video on it. And having that reframe, I think it's probably one of the things that's disrupting formal education, because it just feels so much less efficient
Hmm.
to sit in a lecture hall for days and weeks and months. It's like, why isn't there just a video that teaches me the thing I need to know so that we can all move on with our
Hmm.
lives? It definitely is a big shift. Are you noticing any similarities in organizations that are making those shifts more successfully versus less successfully?
Yeah. I am noticing where they're having more success is actually, which is interesting because some people would assume large organizations, more red tape, but in larger enterprise organizations that are dealing with like franchise locations, retail locations, hourly
Mm-hmm.
employees, they
Mm-hmm.
really understand the fact that they cannot pull their folks
Mm.
off to go to sit and do a 90-minute training, or learning has to take place in the workplace because they need
Yep.
to be able to work or register at the same time and do all of those things. And so they are the ones that are moving forward with shorter videos, and just being more agile when it comes to learning and putting things out there and getting the feedback, because they have
Mm-hmm.
to be.
Mm-hmm.
And where I see a lot of look, I'm going to exclude my very good friends in government and military because that's a whole other ball game, but I do love them. The smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses, I'm noticing you would think they would have more flexibility,
Hmm.
but I'm seeing the opposite. And it's not the flexibility, but they just don't have enough people to actually
Yes.
help to do. And you know what I mean? It's like it's just
Yeah.
a department of one. I've got to do all of these different things. There's just not enough time in the day. And
Yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
impossible to be really great at all of the things. So if you
Yeah.
have good resources, and I'm finding if you're having the need, that's where that you're seeing it. And I would love for them to do more case studies and presentations at conferences to show people this can be done and it can be done well.
Yeah. And I think to the point we've been talking about since it takes resources to create a new like framework, a new
Hmm.
way of doing things. And so yeah, when you have a super lean team, you kind of just have to rely on, okay, what have we always been
Whatever's
doing?
done.
Like I got to keep the train on the tracks. I
Hmm.
just got to keep stuff moving forward. Whereas yeah, even if the whole organization doesn't immediately shift, if you have a larger company, you can afford to say, okay, you go figure this out,
Yes.
go do some research, do some testing, figure out an action plan of what would be our new way of doing this, and then come back and we'll see if we can incorporate it into the whole team. So yeah, that
Hmm.
makes sense, and that there is kind of a level of resourcing that is required to
Yeah.
try to make this happen. It makes a
Hmm.
lot of sense.
And it's, I'll be honest, it's a whole reframe of, from an instructional design perspective, like how I write, to fit more of this style when I'm walking alongside someone. That's a reframe, and thinking
Yeah.
of if I'm going to create something that's more of a marketing piece for what I'm developing, that's a different language I need to be using. So it definitely takes time for people to do that and practice. Like I was not good at writing TikToks before. It took practice, and then you just get better at it and you just keep doing more and more and it gets better and better. And sometimes I can film a TikTok in 5 seconds, which is really fun.
Yeah, it is definitely it's a habit, it's a
Yeah.
skill, it's a different thing, and it's it's so bringing it back to the kind of the beginning of like it really does change what you want to focus on as well. I was just listening to a really great interview with Jimmy Donaldson,
Mhm.
also known as Mr. Beast.
Mhm.
For
Yeah.
anybody listening that doesn't know who Mr. Beast is, he's which is probably a lot of people who don't know who he is, but he is by far the largest YouTuber on the planet. His videos regularly get over 200 million views per video.
Mm-hmm.
He's absolutely huge. He's been, creating for over a decade. And in this interview, he said he still he doesn't believe he fully realizes just how important the title and thumbnail of a video are.
You know how much he
Like
spends on
every,
them?
yeah, it's over $2 million.
$100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
What's
for
that?
one thumbnail, he'll spend $100,000 on a
Yes.
thumbnail. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. And for a
Mm-hmm.
video, he's spending $2.5 million
Oh
on a
yeah.
video. But I think but it's interesting just in terms of this idea of he'll finish a video and he says still just like, man, the title and thumbnail just are really important. And
Mm-hmm.
if you think about, again, the small tweaks of how we do things and the process of how we do things,
Mm-hmm.
how much time do you spend thinking about the title of a course you're putting into your learning management system? you
Ooh,
know
that's so true. Especially we have to pull off, right, any of the requirements because that's where people are like, well, it's required. They have to take it. But there's a lot of other training that's not required, but we want people to take. And that's the training that actually matters. And that's going to move the business
yes,
forward. So you're so
yes,
right. There needs to be a business. Like, I mean, obviously now AI could probably do this, but there needs to be a business on like naming things and like naming courses and making
yeah,
them like fun and
yeah.
engaging because that for me can be the hardest part.
I 100% agree. I spend a lot of time just like I'll go to Mr. Beast's YouTube or different YouTube channels and I'll just like scroll through and like look at the titles and look at the thumbnails and like what's going on
And they
here?
don't match.
Because they, yeah,
That
they
which is always and like that's something also that we need to pay
yep,
attention to, right? Like the
yep,
cover does
yep.
not need to be exactly what the title is.
100%,
Mm-hmm.
100%. Yeah, and so it's a because at least the way I've done it, the way I think most people do it is you spend all this time creating the course, you're going to publish it, you're going to put it in a learning management system, and it's like, oh, okay, so let me you just come up with a title, write a quick description, say it's done.
Yep.
But in this, I think that's just such a small but important example of the reframing that has to go into it of, again, thinking about how can we take lessons from these creators and apply them to the learning world. They start with, and this is different because on a channel like Mr. Beast where it's about entertainment, so there's not necessarily any other need other than entertainment, but they start with a title.
Mm-hmm.
What's the title that we're going to use? And then once they decide, okay, this is a great title, only then do they make a thumbnail. And if they can't get a good title and thumbnail, they don't make the video. They say
Mm-hmm.
it's not interesting enough. um, and so I think, again, it's just an example of us spending more time on maybe it's not the title, but certainly like on the outcome. It's all that
Yeah.
backwards design where you're starting with the outcome that you're trying to achieve
Mm-hmm.
and use that as and if you can't identify the outcome that you're trying to achieve, if you can't identify what the hook is going to be, then maybe you shouldn't make the course.
That's 1000%. If you can't create the hook, you cannot identify the why. It's not actually a need, a true need.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay. Well, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Were you just listening
Well,
to an interview with him about his new series he's launching? Is that, yep.
yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, on the Colin and Samir show.
Yep.
That yeah. So for listeners, it's going to be he's doing an Amazon show. It's going to be the largest game show prize in history,
Mm-hmm.
largest number of contestants in history. It's I think there's a chance he might be just like one of the most creative entertainment minds in the world, and so I think it's going to be really interesting to see what he does in this kind of setting. I think it'll be really
And
interesting.
then just really quickly on this topic, I want people to know too is that he started. There's a lot of lessons to learn from him. He started at like let's say
Yes.
12, 11, very young.
Yes.
And he just kept going and trying and trying. And I think that's something that
Yes.
we don't do enough, right? We see people and like the end results. So people will see Mr. Beast now, but they're not realizing all the like almost 2 decades, right?
Yes.
Of all the work in
Yes.
order to get there. So we look at LinkedIn and we look at like, the folks that are, the thought leaders and this and that, but we're not seeing is all of the work they took to actually get there. They just put themselves out there. They just kept recording. They just kept trying. They just kept doing. And so, okay,
Yep.
maybe you're not not going to hit it out of the park your first 10 times, but the 11th time could be that time. So if you
Yep.
know in your gut that what it is that you're doing is worth it and what's best for the organization, for your learners, keep trying, and that's a huge lesson in and of itself.
100%. He is the ultimate example of the 10-year overnight success.
Yep.
Because he has been, there's a lot of good lessons there.
Mhm.
Well, I think that's a great big picture idea of a hopeful idea to kind of like, kind of bring this to a close. And so like the last question that I always like to ask that's of a similar vein is, if, the show is called Making Better, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing to make the world better, what would it be?
I wish people would give each other more grace. I think we
I
don't
like it.
give others grace. We don't step in their shoes and think about what may be going on for them. And when you can do that and put yourself in someone else's shoes, it helps you a lot more than just them.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
That's a great, excellent. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for being here today. This is, as you can tell, I love talking about this topic. I think there's a lot that we can learn from creators. So thank you so much for indulging me. I'm sure
Yeah.
people learned a lot. Where can people, what's the best way for people to reach out to you? We'll put, links in the
Yeah.
show notes for LinkedIn and everything like that, but what's the best way?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my number one location for sure. And I just want to thank you for having me. It's just been such a great conversation. Love the podcast and all of the insights that you bring to the industry. So was honored when you asked me to be a part of it.
Oh, amazing. No, I am truly honored. So thank you so much. Thanks to everybody listening. We both hope you have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you are a fan of this podcast and have ideas for future episodes, I would really love to hear from you. Send an email to podcast@bettereverydaystudios.com, and we would love to incorporate your ideas into the show. While you're at it, make sure to like this episode and subscribe so you never miss a future episode. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next time on the Making Better podcast.